My wife smiled in front of 60 guests and said she had sold the lake house my father left me. Then she pointed to a brand new Rolls-Royce and announced she had bought it for her dad with the money. But that wasn't the part that broke me. The part that stayed in my chest was when she said she had already found me a nice retirement place in Florida. Like I was a box she had finished packing. She thought I was too old to fight back. She thought I didn't know about the forged signature. So I let them clap. I let them laugh. I let her family celebrate for 35 minutes. And then my lawyer walked through the gate. I used to think silence kept a family together. That day, I learned silence can also teach people how far they're allowed to go. Shanda didn't just sell a house. She tried to decide when my life was over, while I was still standing there breathing. Before we begin, tell me what time you're listening and where you're watching from. Because by the end of this story, I want you to ask yourself one thing. What would you do if your own family tried to sell your life while you were still standing in it? By the time I pulled into Eldridge Vaughn's country club that Saturday afternoon, the parking lot already looked like a dealership for people who needed applause. Black Escalades, a silver Bentley, 2 Mercedes lined up near the valet stand. And right in front, under a red cover, sat something long, polished, and expensive enough to make every man over 60 pretend he was not staring. My wife, Shanda, met me near the entrance before I even shut my car door. "Colton, try to look happy today," she said, smoothing the front of my jacket like I was a child before church. "Daddy has waited a long time for this." "For what?" I asked. She smiled, but not at me, past me, toward the covered car. "You'll see." I had been married to Shanda for 27 years, long enough to know when she was excited, and long enough to know when that excitement had a knife hidden in it. Inside the tent, waiters carried crab cakes and champagne. Eldridge stood near the bar in a cream linen suit, letting people congratulate him before anyone had explained what they were congratulating him for. His family crowded around him, laughing too loudly, the way people do when they want strangers to know they're important. My son Blaine stood near the back with his hands in his pockets. He gave me a small nod, but he did not come over. That bothered me more than it should have. Then I saw the brochure on one of the tables. Golden Palms Retirement Village, Naples, Florida. My name was written on a sticky note across the top, Colton's new place. For a second, the sounds around me went soft. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket and touched the old brass key to my father's lake house. Hollis Barksdale had placed that key in my palm years ago and said, "You're the youngest, son. People will expect you to understand. This time, don't." I should have listened harder. At 3 o'clock, Shanda tapped a spoon against her glass. "Everyone, can I have your attention?" The tent quieted. Phones came up. Eldridge straightened, like a mayor about to accept an award. Shanda walked to the covered car and pulled the red cloth away. A black Rolls-Royce gleamed in the sun. People clapped. Someone whistled. Eldridge pressed both hands to his chest like he had just been handed the American flag. Then, Shanda raised her glass higher. "I sold the lake house. Colton's father left him," she said, smiling wide. "And used the money to buy Daddy the car he always deserved." The applause came first. Then laughter. Then somebody said, "Smart woman." I stood there with my fingers still wrapped around that brass key, feeling the teeth of it press into my palm. Shanda wasn't finished. "And don't worry about Colton," she added, turning toward me with that sweet public voice she used when she wanted witnesses. "We already found him a wonderful place in Florida. Golf, medical care, community dinners. All he has to do is enjoy retirement." A woman near the cake table smiled at me. "You'll love Florida." I looked at Blaine. He looked down. That hurt worse than the crowd. I took one slow breath and asked, "When exactly did I agree to sell my father's house?" The laughter thinned. Shanda's smile flickered, then came back sharper. "Oh, honey," she said, "we already handled the paperwork." That was when I understood. This was not a mistake. It was a performance. So I did not shout. I did not embarrass myself for her benefit. I stepped away from the tent, walked toward the lake, and pulled out my phone. There was one number I had hoped I would never need. Marcia Rutledge. I pressed call. After I called Marcia from the edge of Eldridge's birthday party, I stood by the water and listened to the phone ring. The laughter behind me was still rolling through the tent, soft and careless, like nothing serious had happened. But my mind was already somewhere else. 6 months earlier, back when the lake was still rimmed with ice and everybody was pretending our family was normal, Shanda started asking questions she had never cared about before. It began at breakfast. Nothing dramatic. Just coffee, toast, and her sitting across from me with her tablet open. "How much do you think the lake house is worth now?" she asked. I looked up from the sports page. "Why?" She shrugged. "Just curious. Property values around Lake Geneva are ridiculous. Seems silly not to know." That was true enough. A lot of bad decisions hide behind words that sound reasonable. "A little over 2 million, maybe more with the shoreline," I said. Her eyes stayed on the screen, but I saw her fingers pause. A week later, she asked whether my father's trust could be updated. Then she asked what would happen if I became unable to manage property. I remember that phrase exactly because it didn't sound like Shanda. It sounded like someone had handed it to her. "Unable?" I said. She gave me that soft smile people use when they want to make an insult sound like concern. "Colton, don't be sensitive. I'm talking about planning. People our age should plan." I let it go. That was my mistake. I had spent most of my life letting things go. Youngest son, easygoing husband, reliable father, the one who understood, the one who didn't make a scene. In my family, peace had always been treated like my responsibility. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was in line at the hardware store. A banking alert, property verification request initiated. The account number was unfamiliar. I called the bank from my truck before I even started the engine. A young representative told me the request had been canceled. "No action is needed, Mr. Barksdale." Who initiated it? I'm not able to see that on my end. That should have bothered me more. Instead, I thanked her and drove home. A few nights later, Shanda brought up her father over dinner. "Daddy worked his whole life," she said, cutting her chicken into tiny pieces. "And what does he have to show for it? A paid-off house and old stories. Meanwhile, your family sits on lake property nobody even uses properly. I use it." She gave a small laugh. "You sit there and stare at water." That one landed. I didn't answer right away. She leaned back. "I'm just saying, some families know how to build wealth. Others just keep things because they're sentimental." I wanted to tell her that my father had built that house with his own hands, that every board on the back porch had a story, that not everything with value belongs on a balance sheet. But I had given that speech before. She never heard it. 2 weeks after that, Blaine stopped by. He hadn't come over without calling in a long time. He stood in my kitchen, accepted coffee, and made small talk about work before he finally said, "Dad, have you ever thought about selling the lake place?" I looked at him carefully. "Did your mother ask you to bring that up?" He looked away too quickly. "No. I mean, Shanda mentioned it might make sense. Less maintenance." There it was. Not fishing, not childhood, not his grandfather, just market value and maintenance. "Your granddad left that house to me for a reason," I said. Blaine nodded, but his face had the look of a man trying to agree with two people at once. Around that same time, mail started arriving opened. Once, maybe an accident. Twice, maybe careless. By the third time, I began setting envelopes aside in a drawer in my study. When I asked Shanda, she waved it off. "Colton, I opened one envelope by mistake. Don't turn this into one of your investigations." One of my investigations. That was how she described paying attention. In March, I drove to Milwaukee for my annual trust review with Marcia Rutledge. She had handled my father's estate after Hollis passed, and she had the calm manner of someone who never wasted words. The meeting was nearly over when she closed the folder and looked at me. "Has anyone been asking questions about the lake house?" I sat back. "Why? Just answer me." So I told her about Shanda, about Blaine, about the bank alert, about the opened mail. Marcia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she tapped one finger on the folder. "Most property theft doesn't begin with someone breaking a window," she said. "It begins with access." I drove straight to the lake house after that. The road was quiet, the trees bare, the water still carrying the gray weight of winter. I parked near the porch and sat in the truck longer than I needed to. Then I took the old brass key from my pocket. My father's key. The metal was worn smooth from years of use. I turned it in the lock, stepped inside, and smelled cedar, dust, and cold air. Everything looked the same. His fishing photograph over the mantel, the old green chair by the window, the chipped mug he used for coffee when we worked on the dock. But sameness can lie. Before leaving, I noticed fresh tire tracks near the gravel pull-off behind the house. Not mine, not Blaine's. Someone had been there recently. I stood in the driveway while the light faded over the lake, and for the first time, I stopped telling myself the danger was outside my family. It had already found a seat at my table. The tire tracks stayed in my mind longer than I admitted. I checked with the neighbor across the cove. He had not seen a service truck. I called the propane company. No recent visit. I even walked the gravel drive twice the following week, telling myself I was just checking drainage after the thaw. I knew better. Something had shifted. About 2 months later, I came home early on a Friday. A meeting in Kenosha had been canceled, and I stopped for gas, picked up a sandwich, and drove back before the afternoon traffic thickened. Shanda's car was in the garage, but the house was quiet. I came in through the side door, set my keys on the small table by the laundry room, and started toward the kitchen. That was when I heard my name. Not loud, just clear enough. Shanda was in her office. The door was mostly closed, leaving a narrow line of light on the hallway carpet. Normally, I would have knocked or called out. That day, I stopped, not because I meant to listen, because the next sentence took the choice out of my hands. Once he's in Florida, the house becomes simple, Shanda said. A man's voice came through her speakerphone, calm, businesslike. And you're confident he won't fight the relocation? Shanda gave a small laugh. The kind she used at dinner parties when someone said something only half funny. Colton doesn't fight. He complains quietly, then adjusts. If we present it as helping him, he'll go along with it. My hand tightened around the edge of the wall. The man asked, "What about signatures?" "We only need a few more," she said. "And Blaine understands this is for the best." That was the part that hit hardest. Blaine. My son was not a child. He was old enough to know the difference between help and removal. But hearing his name in that conversation made me feel like the floor had changed under me. I stood there until the call ended. Less than 3 minutes, probably. Long enough to learn my future had been discussed like a storage problem. When Shanda came out 20 minutes later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water. "Oh," she said, startled for half a breath. "You're home early." Meeting got canceled. She opened the refrigerator like nothing in the world was wrong. "You want salmon tonight?" Not Florida, not signatures, not Blaine. Salmon. That almost bothered me more than the phone call. After dinner, I waited until she went upstairs. Then, I went into my study and began pulling folders from the bottom drawer of my file cabinet. Property tax statements, insurance renewals, trust correspondence, old appraisal letters. At first, everything looked ordinary. Then I found a reference number on a copy of a county inquiry I did not recognize. The next morning, I called the county recorder's office. The clerk was polite, the way Midwest clerks usually are when they know you are about to have a bad day. "I can email you copies of the public filings, Mr. Barksdale." By lunch, the documents were in my inbox. Most were routine. One was not. It had my name at the bottom, or close enough to my name that a stranger might not question it, but I knew my own hand. The loop in the B was too tight. The final E dragged too far, and the pressure looked even, like someone had traced confidence instead of writing it. I forwarded it to Marcia Rutledge and called her immediately. She did not sound surprised. That was not comforting. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," she said. I drove to Milwaukee just after breakfast. Marcia had the document printed before I arrived. She studied it at her conference table, then slid it back to me. "Do you remember signing this?" "No." "Are you certain?" "Marcia, I've signed my name thousands of times. That one is wearing my clothes, but it isn't me." She looked at me for a long moment, then opened a file I had never seen before. "Property protection audit." "My father knew?" I asked. "He worried," she said. "There's a difference. Hollis was not afraid of strangers stealing from you. He was afraid someone close enough to borrow your trust would try to take more." I sat back, unable to speak. Marcia's voice stayed even. "Do not confront Shanda. Do not mention this to Blaine. If this is what I think it is, we need facts before we need anger. Anger was already there. But facts would last longer. That night, I drove to the lake house. I used the old brass key and stepped into the quiet. The rooms looked the same as always, but I no longer trusted appearances. I sat in my father's chair and stared at the mantel until the light outside faded. What if this was not confusion? What if this was a plan? 3 days later, Marcia called. "Colton," she said, "I need you back in my office." "What did you find?" A pause. "The first forged document." The first. That word did more damage than the rest of the sentence. I slept maybe 2 hours that night. By 7:30 the next morning, I was already parked outside Marcia Rutledge's office in Milwaukee, watching people hurry past with coffee cups and laptop bags like the world was still ordinary. Mine wasn't. Marcia opened the conference room door herself. No smile, no greeting about the weather, just, "Come in, Colton." That told me enough. On the table were several folders. Not one, several. Each one had a colored tab, a date, and the neat printed labels lawyers use when they are trying to keep chaos organized. She slid the first page toward me. "This is the document we discussed." My copied signature sat at the bottom. Then she slid over a second page, and this. Another signature, then a third, and this. I stared at the 3 pages, and for a moment all I could hear was the air system humming above us. "These are all tied to the lake house?" I asked. "Yes. I didn't sign any of them." "I know." The way she said it was calm, but not soft. Marcia walked me through the timeline. The first filing gave access to property information. The second appeared to authorize borrowing inquiries. The third expanded financial authority connected to the property. Individually, she said, each one could be explained away as clerical confusion. Together, they show progression. "Progression," I repeated. "A ladder," she said. "Someone was climbing it." That sentence stayed with me because it was exactly how it felt. Not a break-in, not one reckless act. A ladder built one rung at a time, while Shanda sat across from me at dinner, asking whether I wanted more coffee. Then, Marcia opened another folder. "This is harder." I looked down. Home equity line of credit. Amount approved, $275,000. Collateral, Barksdale Lake property. My hands stayed flat on the table. I made myself keep them there. "That house was never collateral for anything," I said. "No, not by you." The signature appeared again. Different page. Same careful imitation. Same wrong pressure. Same little lie dressed up as my name. There are moments when betrayal stops being emotional and turns into math. Dollars, dates, transfers, interest rates. Every line on those papers was another calculation someone had made about how long I would stay quiet. "Where did the money go?" I asked. Marcia looked at one of her associates, a quiet man with reading glasses and a yellow legal pad. He gave her a short nod. "It moved through several accounts," she said. "Some personal, some business. One caught our attention." She turned the next page. "Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC. I had never heard of it. Registered in Delaware," Marcia said. "No employees. No active business activity we can confirm. No public-facing operation. It appears to exist mainly to receive and move funds." I leaned back slowly. "Who owns it?" "We requested the control documents yesterday. They came in late last night." She removed her glasses. I had known Marcia long enough to understand that meant the next words would matter. Then she placed the ownership record in front of me. Single controlling member, Shanda Vaughn Barksdale. For a few seconds, I did not move, not because I was surprised, because part of me had still been foolish enough to hope there was another explanation. A bad advisor, a paperwork error, a misunderstanding that grew legs, but there it was, her name. No room left for kindness to reinterpret it. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked down at traffic moving below. My first instinct was to call her. Ask her what kind of person sits beside her husband in church, smiles at neighbors, talks about retirement, and quietly borrows against his father's house. Marcia read my mind. "Do not confront her." I turned. "Marcia, If you speak to her now, she may destroy records, coach witnesses, or move remaining funds. I understand what you feel, but this is no longer a marriage argument. This is evidence. That word cooled something in me. Evidence, not anger, not betrayal, not embarrassment. Evidence. So what do? We document everything. Full title audit, expanded banking review, preservation letters, emergency trust protections. And if the next filing appears, we stop it before it records. The next filing? Marcia hesitated just long enough for me to notice. We believe there may be an ownership transfer being prepared. I sat down again. The room felt smaller than it had 5 minutes before. Later that evening, I drove straight to the lake house. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call Blaine. I didn't go home to ask Shanda what she had done. I went where my father's voice still made sense. The brass key turned in the lock with that familiar heavy click. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and old books. I walked through the kitchen, the porch, the little workshop where my father kept coffee cans full of screws he swore were still useful. Everything looked untouched. That was the cruel part. A place can look safe while people are already carving it up on paper. Near sunset, my phone rang. Marcia. I answered without saying hello. They found the pending transfer, she said. I closed my eyes. To Harbor Crest? Yes. Partial ownership. Prepared, not recorded yet. I stood in the living room with my father's key still in my hand. Someone was no longer trying to borrow against the house. Someone was getting ready to take it. After Marcia told me someone was preparing to move ownership, the days before Eldridge's birthday party began to feel less like ordinary time and more like a hallway getting narrower. Shanda changed tactics. She stopped asking direct questions and started sending other people. Her cousin called first. Colton, I heard you're still going back and forth about the lake house. At your age, wouldn't it be nice to have less stress? Then one of Eldridge's old golfing friends cornered me after church. Florida's not a bad move, he said, patting my shoulder. Warm weather, good doctors, no stairs. You'll thank Shanda later. Even Blaine called me twice in 1 week, which should have been a blessing, except both calls circled the same drain. Dad, nobody's trying to take anything from you, he said. We're just trying to make life easier. We? I asked. There was a pause. You know what I mean. I did know. That was the problem. The same sentences kept coming from different mouths. Lake house upkeep, retirement planning, being practical, letting go. Every phrase sounded polished, like it had been passed around before it reached me. At first, it made me angry. Then it made me tired. That kind of pressure wears on a man, not all at once. It rubs, day after day, until you begin wondering if standing your ground is courage or just stubbornness wearing a better suit. One rainy afternoon, I drove to the lake house alone. The sky was low and gray, the kind of Wisconsin rain that doesn't fall hard but settles into everything. I parked near the porch and sat in the truck while drops gathered on the windshield. For a moment, I didn't want to go inside, because once I stepped through that door, I would remember why I was fighting, and remembering costs energy. I finally took the brass key from my pocket. It felt heavier than usual. I unlocked the door and walked into the front room, where my father's old green chair still faced the window. His fishing tackle sat in a wooden box by the wall. On the mantel was a photograph of him holding Blaine when Blaine was maybe 6, both of them grinning with sunburned faces and a stringer of bluegill between them. I sat down and held the key in my hand. For the first time since this began, I let myself think the sentence I had been pushing away. Maybe I should let it go. No lawsuit, no family scandal, no public shame, no old man fighting his wife over a house. Just sign whatever needed signing, take whatever money remained, and let Shanda tell everyone she had helped me make a smart decision. Peace, at least from the outside. That evening, back home, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Shanda was upstairs on the phone with someone, laughing softly like her life was proceeding just fine. I drafted an email to Marcia. Marcia, I've been thinking, maybe we should pause everything. I stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. Then I closed the laptop without sending it. 2 days later, I attended a small university event in Milwaukee. I had promised an old colleague I would sit on a panel for students studying sustainable design. I nearly canceled, but habit took me there. Afterward, a young woman named Ava Benton approached me. She was 32, working on her graduate degree, the first in her family to make it that far. She asked careful questions about old lake structures, drainage, shoreline erosion. Not the kind of questions people ask to impress you, the kind they ask because they want to learn. Then she said, "My grandfather lost our family place in Michigan because somebody forged papers after he got sick. My mom still talks about it like it happened last week." I looked at her more closely. She gave a small, sad smile. "People say it was just property, but it wasn't. It was where our family knew who we were." That sentence sat with me all the way back to Lake Geneva. Sometimes you don't recognize your own surrender until you see someone younger still willing to fight. A week later, Marcia called. She had found archived correspondence connected to Harbor Crest Holdings. Most of it was dull, routing notes, draft language, file attachments. But one line in an internal message made everything clear. Once he's relocated, liquidation becomes much easier. Relocated. Not helped, not protected. Relocated. Like I was furniture in the wrong room. I read the sentence 3 times. Each time, it got colder and cleaner in my mind. This had never been about making my life easier. It had never been about retirement, or warm weather, or concern for my health. The goal was to remove me from the one place my father had trusted me to keep. The next morning, I met Marcia at her office. She looked at me across the table and waited. No lecture, no pressure. I placed the printed message in front of her. "Keep going," I said. "All of it? All of it. The audit, the filings, the injunction, whatever protects that house." Marcia nodded once. When I left her office, I did not feel happy. I felt steady. That night, I returned to the dock. The rain had passed, and the lake was quiet under a pale evening sky. I slipped the brass key back into my pocket. Not as a burden anymore. Not as a victory either. As a responsibility I had finally stopped apologizing for. Shanda thought I was wearing down. She was wrong. She was getting careless. 3 weeks before Eldridge's birthday party, Marcia called before 8 in the morning. I was in the garage, wiping sawdust off a small repair I had made for the lake house pantry, when my phone lit up on the workbench. Marcia did not waste time. "We found another filing." I looked at the board in my hand, then set it down carefully. "How bad?" "Bad enough that I need you here." I drove to Milwaukee without calling Shanda, without texting Blaine, without making the mistake of asking the people I suspected to explain what I had already seen. By then, I had learned that explanations can be dressed up faster than evidence. When I arrived, Marcia had a new packet waiting. "This one was prepared for transfer authorization," she said. "Prepared? Not recorded yet. But it was moving." The packet looked official enough to fool most people. Identity confirmations, notary pages, property descriptions, supporting records. My name appeared in all the right places, except I had not put it there. I had spent my life around buildings. I knew what a bad foundation looked like. At first, it's only a hairline crack, then a door won't close, then a wall shifts. Eventually, the whole structure admits what it has been hiding. This was that moment. "This isn't one forged signature," I said. "No," Marcia replied. "It's an access system." Over the next hour, she walked me through what her team had uncovered. Title company auditors were now cooperating. A lender had flagged inconsistent verification notes. County records showed repeated inquiries tied to the same small circle of names. Some of those names I recognized. That was the part that hurt in a different way. A retired notary who had eaten at our Thanksgiving table, one of Eldridge's business acquaintances, a woman from Shanda's charity committee who once told me I had such a steady presence. Their signatures sat on witness lines and acknowledgement forms. Maybe they did not know the full story. Maybe they trusted Shanda. Maybe they looked the other way because it was easier than asking uncomfortable questions. But the result was the same. My father's house had become paperwork passed through familiar hands. Marcia slid another page toward me. "Because of the transfer attempt and the forged documents, this may now involve criminal exposure." I sat back. That phrase made the room quieter. Not civil disagreement, not family misunderstanding. Criminal exposure. She kept her voice steady. "You still have a choice. We can try to resolve some of this privately, recover the property position, Stop the transfer. Avoid public escalation. Part of me wanted that. I will not pretend otherwise. I was tired of waking up before dawn with my mind already running. Tired of sitting across from Shanda while she discussed groceries and dinner plans as if she had not built a machine under our marriage. Tired of wondering how many people would call me dramatic if the truth came out. Keeping peace can become a habit so deep you mistake it for character. I looked at the papers again. Then I thought about that sentence in the message. Once he's relocated, liquidation becomes much easier. No, some things should not be negotiated into silence. What do you need from me? I asked. Marcia folded her hands. Authorization to preserve evidence, expand the title review, notify relevant institutions, and prepare emergency trust filings. You have it. All of it? All of it. She nodded once, not pleased, not triumphant, just ready. From that point on, I stopped reacting. I started watching. Over the next several days, I went home at normal hours. I answered Shanda when she asked about dinner. I listened when Blaine called and said, "Dad, I hope you're not letting lawyers get in your head." That one almost made me laugh. "Son," I said, "lawyers don't create signatures." He went quiet. At church that Sunday, Eldridge squeezed my shoulder and said, "Sometimes letting women handle the practical side is the smartest thing a man can do." I smiled politely. That was the moment I understood Shanda had told them all some version of the story already. Poor Colton, sentimental Colton, aging Colton, difficult Colton. So I let them believe it. Meanwhile, Marcia's office kept building the file. Every inquiry, every form, every transfer trail, every date. Then Shanda made the mistake Marcia had been waiting for. She signed the formal listing agreement. The lake house was officially placed into motion for sale. That act triggered the trust protections my father had insisted on years earlier. Within hours, notices went out. The brokerage was flagged. The title chain froze. The pending transfer became evidence instead of progress. That evening, I drove to the lake and walked down to the dock. The water was calm. The kind of calm that makes you understand storms are not the only things with power. My phone buzzed just as the sun touched the trees. A text from Marcia. "I'm ready." I read it twice. Then I put the phone in my pocket beside the brass key. Everyone going to Eldridge's birthday party thought they were walking into a celebration. Only Marcia and I knew better. By the morning of Eldridge Vaughn's birthday party, I already knew what was hiding underneath the flowers, the speeches, and the champagne. What I did not know was how far Shanda would go once she felt the ground shifting under her feet. The party started at 2 o'clock at Eldridge's lakeside estate, not far from my father's place. His house was bigger, newer, and built to impress people from the driveway. Mine was older and quieter. His had imported stone columns and a circular entrance. Mine had cedar siding, a crooked dock, and a porch my father rebuilt twice because he hated wasting good lumber. Luxury cars lined the drive when I arrived. Valets in white shirts waved guests forward. A jazz trio played under a tent near the lawn. Servers passed around champagne and little plates of food nobody could pronounce without looking at the menu card. I came alone. Shanda had left early, saying she needed to help with family preparations. That phrase made more sense once I saw the covered car near the front of the house. The Rolls-Royce, black, shined to a mirror finish, wrapped with a silver ribbon like it was a Christmas morning surprise for a man who had already gotten everything he asked for. People greeted Shanda before they greeted me. They hugged her, kissed her cheek, told her how beautiful everything looked. A few nodded in my direction, but most treated me like a husband-shaped object standing near the real host. That was nothing new. I had been the youngest son my whole life, the one expected to understand, the one who could sit at the end of the table, the one who would be fine. If there was a shortage of chairs, Colton would stand. If there was a disagreement, Colton would keep calm. If someone needed to give up something, Colton would see the bigger picture. That old role followed me into my own marriage. At 2:30, Eldridge tapped his glass and called everyone toward the pavilion. He looked pleased with himself in a cream jacket and polished shoes, standing in front of nearly 60 guests, as though the whole afternoon had been arranged by God and country club membership. "Family," he said, raising his glass, "is what a man leaves behind." People smiled. I watched Shanda. She stood beside him with a microphone in one hand and the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Eldridge talked about hard work, legacy, and knowing when to let the next generation lead. Then he gestured toward the covered car. The ribbon came off. The cover slid down. The crowd broke into applause. Eldridge put both hands over his mouth. Shanda laughed and leaned into him for a photograph. Phones rose. Somebody called out, "Now that's a birthday gift." Then Shanda took the microphone. "This is for my daddy," she said, voice bright and smooth. "A man who taught me that family takes care of family." More applause. She turned slightly, just enough to include me in the frame. "And I want everyone to know Colton helped make this possible too." I felt the old brass key in my pocket before I meant to touch it. Shanda continued. "We finally reorganized some underused family assets. You know, that old lake house Colton's father left him. He agreed it was time to stop letting memories sit empty and start using resources wisely." People laughed. One man near the bar said, "Smart move." A woman behind me whispered, "Honestly, he'll thank her later." Then Shanda delivered the part she had rehearsed. "And don't worry, we found Colton a wonderful retirement community in Florida. Warm weather, golf, medical care, everything he needs." Sometimes people resist change, but that's why family steps in. That one turned the whole lawn quiet for half a breath. Then the crowd tried to cover the discomfort with polite laughter. I looked at Blaine. He stood near the back, holding a glass he hadn't touched. His face had gone tight. He stared at the Rolls-Royce, then at his mother, then at me. Not angry, not proud, worried. Shanda saw it too. I did not argue. I did not correct her. I lifted my iced tea and took a slow drink. 23 minutes had passed since her announcement, 12 more to go. Shanda looked over at me and frowned just slightly. She had expected a reaction, a raised voice, a wounded question. Maybe an old man's embarrassment she could turn into proof that she was right. Instead, I smiled like a man listening to bad weather from inside a strong house. That unsettled her. She moved toward Blaine and caught his arm near the side of the tent. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. "Do not start acting strange now," she said. Blaine answered low, "Mom, what did you use to buy that car?" Her face changed. Only for a second. Then she touched his cheek like he was 10 years old. "This is not the place." He stepped back from her hand. That was when I knew Blaine had begun to see the shape of it. The music kept playing. Eldridge posed beside the car. Guests congratulated Shanda. Someone asked me if I was excited about Florida, and I said, "I'm learning a lot today." At 31 minutes, Shanda checked her phone. At 33, she looked toward the driveway. At 34, she stopped smiling between photographs. Then the gray sedan turned through the gate. Marcia Rutledge stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. I saw Shanda's face lose color from across the lawn, and for the first time that afternoon, nobody had to tell me the celebration was over. Marcia did not hurry across the lawn. That was what made people notice her. She walked with 2 associates behind her, one carrying a document case, the other holding a slim folder against his chest. The jazz trio kept playing for a few more bars, then faded out awkwardly when guests began turning toward the driveway. Shanda reached Marcia first. "Marcia," she said, forcing a smile so tight it looked painful. "This is really not the place." Marcia stopped just long enough to meet her eyes. When trust property is being misrepresented in public, Mrs. Barksdale, the place becomes appropriate. The word trust moved through the crowd like a cold draft. Eldridge lowered his champagne glass. "What's this about?" he asked. Marcia opened her briefcase on a patio table. Not dramatically, not like television, just carefully, the way serious people handle serious paper. "I'm here on behalf of the Barksdale Family Trust," she said. "An emergency review has uncovered unauthorized filings connected to the lake house Mr. Barksdale inherited from his father." Shanda laughed once, too quick. "Oh, please. Colton is upset because I helped him make a practical decision." I stayed where I was. That bothered her more than an argument would have. Marcia laid out copies, not originals. Trust pages, property records, lender notices, a title freeze confirmation. She did not read every line. She did not have to. "There are forged signatures," she said. "A home equity line secured without authorization. a pending transfer to Harbor Crest Holdings LLC, and a brokerage listing filed without valid authority. People who had been smiling 10 minutes earlier now looked at their shoes. Royce turned toward Shanda. Harbor what? Shanda lifted her chin. Everything was approved. By whom? Marcia asked. By my husband. Then she looked at me, sharp and challenging. Tell them, Colton. Tell them you knew. I stepped forward slowly. I knew someone was using my name, I said. I did not know my wife would say it out loud in front of 60 witnesses. A few guests shifted. Someone whispered, "Good Lord." Shanda's face hardened. He signed. He forgets things. That's what nobody wants to talk about. She raised her voice, aiming at the crowd now. He's been confused for months. We were trying to protect him. That Florida community was for his safety. There it was. The last card. Not greed. Concern. Not theft. Caregiving. That accusation was poison because it sounded familiar to people. Age. Forgetfulness. Families stepping in. Everyone over 60 knows how easily help can become a leash. Marcia turned one page. For that reason, Mr. Barksdale underwent an independent competency evaluation 3 weeks ago. He was found fully capable of managing his legal and financial affairs. Shanda blinked. She had not expected that. Marcia placed another report beside it, and a forensic document examiner has concluded that the signatures on these filings do not match Mr. Barksdale's verified samples. The lawn went still. Shanda grabbed her phone. No, I have messages. I have proof he wanted to sell. She held up screenshots, conversations about maintenance, property taxes, retirement. A line from years earlier where I had written, "Maybe we should consider all options someday." Several people leaned in. For a moment, doubt returned to the room. I nodded. Those are real. Shanda's eyes flashed with relief. Thank you, she said bitterly. Finally. I looked at Marcia. She handed copies of the full thread to Eldridge, Blaine, and 2 guests standing closest. The part she left out, I said, is where I rejected selling 3 messages later. And the part where my father's trust required written approval from me and Marcia before any listing could be filed. Eldridge read the page. His hand began to tremble. Blaine stepped forward then, pale and stiff. I knew about the credit line, he said. Shanda spun toward him. Don't you dare. But Blaine kept going. I signed papers I didn't read. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Mom had it handled. His voice thinned. I knew enough to ask questions. I just didn't want the answers. That hurt more than Shanda's lies. Because it was honest. Royce stared at the Rolls-Royce. The ribbon still hung across the hood, bright and foolish in the late sun. He turned to his daughter. You used his father's house to buy me this car? No one answered. No answer was needed. Shanda's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. For the first time since I had known her, she had no room to perform. Marcia closed her briefcase. The listing has been suspended. The transfer is frozen. Preservation notices have been issued. Formal proceedings will follow. One by one, guests began leaving, quietly. No goodbye speeches, no more congratulations. Just car doors shutting and whispers moving through the grass. The Rolls-Royce stayed where it was. A monument to a lie with perfect paint. I did not feel victory. That surprised me. I felt tired and relieved. Because the truth had finally stopped living only inside my chest. Later that night, when the last taillights disappeared down Eldridge's long driveway and the lake turned black under the trees, Blaine found me sitting on my father's dock. He didn't ask if he could sit. He just lowered himself beside me, careful, like the boards might remember what he had done. For a while, neither of us spoke. The water moved against the posts in that soft, steady rhythm I had heard since I was a boy. That sound had been there when my father taught me to bait a hook, when Blaine caught his first fish, when I came back after funerals and disappointments and long seasons of pretending I was fine. Finally, Blaine said, I knew about the credit line. I kept my eyes on the water, he continued, voice low. I didn't know she forged your signature, not at first, but I knew enough to ask questions. I just didn't want the answers. That sentence hurt because it was honest, not polished, not rehearsed, not cleaned up for court, just the truth. She told me it was temporary, he said. She said you were being stubborn, that the house was sitting there while everybody else was trying to move forward. She made it sound like we were helping you. And you believed her? He rubbed both hands over his face. I wanted to. That was the part people don't like to admit. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from believing a lie completely. Sometimes it comes from wanting the lie to be easier than the truth. I asked him, when did you know something wasn't right? He stared at the lake for a long time. Years ago, he said. Not months, years. Small things. Bank comments. Rushed papers. Stories that changed slightly when repeated. Shanda's sudden interest in my father's property. The way she said your dad's house, like it was a problem to be solved, not a place where our family had once been whole. He apologized then, not loudly, not in a way meant to make me comfort him. I'm sorry, Dad. I believed he meant it. I also knew, meaning it did not repair what had been broken. I don't hate you, I said. But love and trust are not the same thing. He nodded like the words had already been sitting inside him. The months that followed were quieter than people might expect. Real consequences rarely arrive with music. They come in envelopes, court dates, certified letters, and phone calls from attorneys who have reviewed another stack of records. The brokerage withdrew the listing. The pending transfer was stopped. Harbor Crest Holdings was pulled apart on paper until it had nowhere left to hide. The forged documents became impossible to explain away. Shanda faced what she had spent months believing she could outrun. I did not celebrate. Justice is not the same as revenge. Revenge wants someone to suffer. Justice wants the truth to stop being negotiable. By midsummer, I moved into the lake house full-time. At first, every room felt like a witness. The kitchen remembered arguments that had never happened inside it. The porch remembered my father's hands on the railing. The dock remembered Blaine as a boy, all elbows and excitement, holding a bluegill like it was a trophy from another world. So I worked. I sanded old boards, fixed a loose stair, cleared brush near the shoreline, repainted the back door the same deep green my father always liked. Simple work has a way of settling a man when his life has been pulled apart by complicated people. One afternoon, I opened the old cedar desk in the front room and found a small envelope tucked behind the drawer. Inside was the original brass key, not the copy I had carried for years. The original. Attached to it was a note in my father's handwriting. Colton, a key is not ownership. It is responsibility. I sat there for a long time with that key in my palm. That became the idea. With Marcia's help, I created the Barksdale Lakeshore Fellowship, a small nonprofit for working-class students studying conservation, environmental design, and shoreline restoration. Young people who understood that land was not just an investment, it was memory, labor, and care. Some of the funding came from assets recovered after the attempted sale. That felt right. What had nearly been used to erase my father's legacy would now extend it. By spring, the first group of students visited. I opened the lake house door with the brass key and let them step inside. One young man paused on the porch and said, "Mr. Barksdale, why did you fight so hard for this place?" I looked at the lake, then at the key in my hand. "Because some things are valuable before anyone puts a price on them," I said, "and because someone trusted me to know the difference." Blaine came by a few weeks later. We weren't healed. Not fully. Maybe not ever in the easy way people like to imagine. But we were honest. And that was more than we had been for a long time. Before he left, he touched the doorframe and said, "Grandpa would be proud." I said, "He'd want you to keep showing up." He nodded. After his truck pulled away, I walked to the end of the dock. The evening light stretched across the water. The house stood behind me, still old, still imperfect, still ours in the way that mattered. I was no longer the man they assumed would stay quiet to keep everyone comfortable. I was no longer waiting for someone else to decide what my peace was worth. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from people who believe your sacrifice belongs to them. And sometimes the only way to heal is to protect what matters, even when your voice shakes at first. The lake moved gently under the dock. The key rested warm in my pocket. And for the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like something being taken from me. It felt like a door I could open myself.